Okay, so we're going to get started today. Today's a little different than we've been doing because my lecture period is really short. I think I only have like 10 slides to show you. And then we'll spend more time in Photoshop actually demoing what's going on. And so today the topic is something called a blending mode in Photoshop. And I think this is one of those pieces where if you're in just a Photoshop class, they may touch on blending modes a little bit. They may do a little bit of blending modes when it pertains to photos, which we'll do today. But this, in particular, is very, very useful as an architect or as a designer because it's a way of getting pesky backgrounds and stuff to just disappear if you understand how to use them. So I will show you the photo techniques that are related to them today, but I'll also give you a little bit of a carrot toward this is where we're going with it. We'll use it a ton at the end of the semester. So it's definitely something that's important for you to understand and know how to use it. So essentially what a blending mode is it's kind of like, I guess the best example would be, let's say you had a drawing that was on the table and you took out a white piece of trace and you laid it over your drawing. You could still see through that piece of trace to your drawing, but it made it kind of white. Okay? Well, what if instead of putting the white trace on your drawing, what if you put a piece of clear film on your drawing? Well, it would change. It would look different, right? It's still semi-transparent, but it would look different. What if you took a piece that was yellow trace and put that on? It would look different. So what we're doing with blending modes is we're changing how the layer on top of another layer applies to the layer that's below it. So just like our stack of tracing paper, when we had a different color or we had a different clarity, how that applies is a little bit different. What you see is different. So it's similar to an opacity slider where we're letting some of it transparent, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. So this little menu on the right side here is our typical blending mode groups. The unfortunate thing is that the blending mode names don't really mean much. And so they came up with these names, Adobe came up with the names, but they're generally broken down into certain categories as we look at them. So we have our normal one. That's what Photoshop is always on by default. It's right there under normal. Then we move into this group right here, and you'll see that Photoshop has these little lines that kind of divides it into sections, which helps a little bit. This group is generally about darkening the image. Then we have a group that's generally about lightening the image. And then we have a group that's about darkening the darks and lightening the lights and leaving the middles the same. So we have those kind of three major categories, and we'll talk about those three in depth. And then at the bottom, we have some really weird stuff going on. And I'll show you a few of those at the bottom. We'll work today with Luminosity. They can be powerful, but they're a little bit more specialized in their use. So our most commonly used ones, the ones that we're going to definitely use today, are the multiply, which is a darkening effect, the screen, which is a lightening effect, and the overlay. We will use later in the semester, we'll use soft light a little bit when we fake lighting conditions in a collage. But for the most part, we're going to use multiply, screen, and overlay. Those are the three big ones. And I'll show you how those guys work in the coming slides. OK, so this is one of those things that's really hard to illustrate in lecture. But once you start to do it, it'll kind of make sense. So I'm going to go back and forth through this and try it my best. So the setup here is that I have a blue background that's on the lowest layer in the layer stack. And on top of it, I have these three squares. One square is black, one square is neutral, 50% gray, and the other square is white. In reality, the black is kind of a really dark gray. I should have made it more black than it is. But anyway, you get the idea. Below that is a gradient that goes all the way from dark gray to white. So that upper layer, the top layer, is the one that I'm going to apply the blending mode to. The bottom layer stays the same. It doesn't change. It's just blue. It's just a normal layer. So let's look at them once they're stacked together. So I'm looking at this as if they're stacked, not in 3D anymore. When they're stacked together, obviously when they're both in normal mode, there's no special blending mode applied, we see what's on top of the blue squares. Now if we look at, there's our layer stack right here. Let me go forward one more slide. There we go. If we look at our layer stack, in Photoshop, we can see that there's our background layer. That's on the bottom of the layer stack. Remember, this works just like a stack of papers. The things that are lowest down in the stack are furthest in at the bottom of your stack of papers. Things that are on top are on top. So our background is there. That's blue. On top of that, we have our layer 1 right there. Now in this, we're going to put on the multiply blending mode. So remember, multiply was in that section of darkening. So it's going to have an effect to darken the image. So the lighter areas, i.e. the white in this, are going to become transparent. The medium grays are going to become semi-transparent. And the darks are going to make things darker. So let's look at that once it goes forward. And I'll flip back and forth so you can see this a few times. As it happens, the white goes away. The gray kind of affects the blue and makes it a little bit darker blue, and the black really affects the blue and makes it a very dark blue. So let me back that one up one more time. So this is, again, a multiply effect. So here we go. Lights become transparent. We move on to the next set. I said multiply. The next one was screen, and this is in the lightning section. So right here, when we apply a screen blending mode, the dark stuff are going to get transparent. The white is going to become more opaque, more solid, more white, or lighter. So let's look at that when it happens. There we go. So like I said, my black wasn't true black. If it was true black, it would become completely transparent. It was kind of a dark gray, so we get a little bit of a ghosted image there. So the lightest, the white area, becomes really opaque and light, where the dark becomes transparent. So it's the opposite effect. So we had multiply, then we had screen. You could probably guess where the third one's going. This is the overlay blending mode, and that is where we are in the center, right? This piece, which is that neutral 50% gray, that's going to stay the same. This is going to disappear, and this is going to disappear. So let's see it happen. Nope, sorry. I didn't explain that correctly. Go back. It happens, right? Sometimes your brain is just not explaining it correctly. The middle is going to become transparent. The darks are going to become darker. The lights are going to become lighter. That was what I was supposed to say. It happens, right? So when that happens, the middle becomes transparent, and the lights become lighter. The darks become darker. So like I said, this is one of those things that's hard to illustrate in a lecture format. That's why I do these slides where it fades so you can kind of see it happen. The truth is, it's going to sink in a lot better when we actually do this together. So you all have your exercise in front of you. You have your exercise 105. See, I told you that was like the shortest lecture ever, right? So you all have your exercise 105 in front of you. What I want you to do while I switch computers so that I can demo this stuff is if you go to the course website, you go to exercise 105, you can download, there's a ps-blendingmodes.psd. That's a Photoshop file. You can right-click on it, save that file onto your flash drive, and then open it up in Photoshop. It looks exactly like the base file that I was doing. Yeah?
So the white become lighter, shouldn't it be completely white?
It's lighter, not light. So it's a little bit, it's not like the second one. So it's not where this becomes completely black and this becomes completely white and this becomes transparent. It's not quite as strong of an effect. There's a way to make it stronger by layering it a couple times, and I'll show you that as we go forward. So if you guys would download that sample file, that's a good place to start. I'll switch over and then I'll walk you through this whole initial thing about how we do this in the first place. OK, so thanks for bearing with me while I switched over. Hopefully you guys all have this sitting on your computer, because this is the file that we're going to practice on to begin with. That's part one. Then we'll move into how do these effects change photos, and what can we do with these blending modes going forward. OK, so in the first part, you've downloaded this sample file. You'll notice that different than the layer stack that I showed you on lecture, there's actually two more layers. There's a layer 2 and a layer 3. They're both off right now, and they should stay off for now. I'm going to show you how this works a little bit later on. We're going to start working with just layer 1 and the background layer. So exactly as I said, if I were to turn off layer 1, we have just a blue background, nothing fancy. And on top of that, we have these squares and the gradient. Above and below where this checkerboard pattern is, that's completely transparent so that we can see the blue background behind it when it's on. So now, when I go to apply the blending mode in the first place, it's actually very, very easy to do. Essentially, I need to select the layer. So there I have layer 1 selected. That's the layer that the blending mode is going to be applied to. And then I come up here, and there's a drop-down menu that says Normal. That Normal, if I click it, will give me the same groups that were shown in lecture. Normal is what we stay on for the most part. First group is generally darkening the dark colors. The next group is generally lightening the light colors. Next group is generally the middle, and then we get into the specialties. So today, what I want you to do is, now that we have this put together, I want you to switch this first one to multiply. And you'll see exactly what happened in the lecture, where the white becomes transparent, the middle gray makes the blue background a little bit darker, and the black background or dark gray background makes the blue a lot darker. Notice that it's not actually black, it's dark, dark blue. And you can see this better on your computer screens than you can up on mine. So it's actually darkening the blue, not making it black. Does that make sense? So there's a little bit of a difference. So now if I were to take that same layer and switch, instead of multiply, we move down to the next group, and I switch to screen mode, the opposite effect happens. So the dark blacks or dark grays become very transparent. The mid-range lightens the blue. This is still blue in color. It's just lightened that blue up. And then this last one is almost a pure white because it's so bright. Technically, we could say that that has a tiny bit of blue in it, but for the most part, it's just white. So now if I were to take that layer 1 and move down to the next group, which was overlay mode, the middle becomes transparent, or mostly transparent, and the dark becomes darker, the light becomes lighter. And so this effect isn't as strong, like we said, as the other two. There's a way, and I'll show you guys this a little bit later on, there's a way to make this effect stronger by duplicating the layer. If I right-click on this layer and say Duplicate Layer, it has the blending mode still applied, and I can keep working, and this gets darker and this gets lighter, and I can keep working it out with multiple layers. It doesn't matter for what we're doing right now, you don't need to do that, but in answer to your question, that's how you would increase the intensity. So we've gone through those basic modes. Now, how does this apply long term? Let's turn off layer 1, and I'm going to turn on layer 2 here. So layer 2 is an architectural line drawing. Came out of SketchUp. So this should look relatively familiar for those of you that took 120. You probably did, little SketchUp models and that sort of thing. If you've ever tried to take this kind of a drawing and make the white background go away, anybody tried that before? No? Well, sometimes you'll need to do it. Sometimes you need to collage. Sometimes you need to make that white background go away. It's really challenging. So I could come in and I could use the eraser tool, for example. Don't worry, you're not going to actually do this. I'm just showing this as an example. And I could, erase this and try not to touch my line. I could do a magic wand selection and try to select it and delete it just so that line, but it's cumbersome. The process is cumbersome. Instead, let me back up a second, we can apply a blending mode to this. So I'll take my layer and I'll apply the multiply blending mode, and the white becomes completely transparent that fast. So I didn't actually have to delete the background. I'm using it to its advantage. And so now we see the black lines. If I switch this from multiply to screen, I get just the blue showing through. So in this case, it's kind of like a blue line drawing, where the lines that were black are now dark blue. If I switched from screen mode to overlay mode, I get kind of a weird hybrid. And that's not necessarily what I was after. So for the most part, you're going to be using this multiply blending mode where the white becomes transparent, showing the background. And we'll use this later on in class a fair amount. So what if we turn on layer 3? This is the inverse. This is the black with the white lines. So in this case, if I went to my multiply blending mode, I'd get the blue lines showing up. You can barely see it on there, but you can see it on yours, certainly. But if I switched to the screen mode this time, remember it's the reverse, now I get like the blueprint look, where I have my white lines on my blue background. So it's just a different strategy. Yeah? Make sure that you've clicked on the layer itself and then try the blending mode. Because if you're on a layer that isn't active, it's not going to let you click on it. So, okay, I'll come. Okay, yeah.
Is there any way to make the layer 2 become layer 3? So height become black.
So if I wanted layer 2 to become layer 3, yes. So if I had layer 2, let me switch it back to normal mode. Essentially, all that I need to do to layer 2 with it selected is to go up to Image and then go to Adjustments, Invert, or press Control-I, and it'll flip from black to white. It inverts the colors. So that I didn't need to do that, but that's the answer to your question. So let me flip that back. Control-I flips it back. And then we come back to my last mode here. When we come down from screen mode and we go to overlay mode, again, it doesn't do that much. So in the architectural sense where we're working with line drawings and we want a collage, we're going to be working primarily in the multiply or the screen. And that'll be reinforced as we go forward in class. But I like to at least show you where I'm going with these techniques so that you can kind of keep them in the back of your mind. Today we're going to work more with photos and how do blending modes help photos in our processing. So we're going to start first with just a basic black and white photograph, hopefully a faded one. And chances are you don't have one of those sitting around, so you're going to need to do a little bit of a search for them. I would start with the Creative Commons search, which is search.creativecommons.org. The nice thing about the Creative Commons search is it searches for images that you're actually allowed to work with. Generally, they only require attribution, which means essentially I borrowed this image from this person who said I could work with it, which is nice. If you do just a Google image search, you'll find a lot of images are copywritten, a lot of images have watermarks on them, and those kinds of things aren't convenient to work with. There are times, of course, where you're working in design and you can't find the image that you want and you need another image, and maybe somebody will be nice to you. In all my years of teaching, I've only had one nasty email written to me about a student who borrowed somebody else's image and didn't credit them or whatever. And so it does happen, and I like to at least bring it up that it does happen. But this is a good, safe place to start. Yeah?
So, like you said, some picture have watermark. So if you download that picture, is there any way you can get rid of the watermark?
There are certainly strategies in Photoshop that would let you get rid of it. The reason the watermark's on it in the first place is because somebody owns the image, and they don't want you to use it. So I would encourage you to use Creative Commons Search because there's an awful lot of images that will satisfy what you need that somebody has freely said, yes, go ahead and use my work.
I'm just curious. Just
Yeah,
a question.
yeah. So it is technically doable. They try to make it challenging. Hence the reason that there's a watermark. So in Creative Commons Search, you're going to enter your search query up here. So I would do black and white photo, for example. And then we can choose what website we're searching in. And so before you actually click search, you may find that searching in Flickr is good. Certainly if you're looking for images, there's a lot of images that are available in Flickr. You can search Google Images. That's one of the places that you can search. So you click on the button that reflects what you're trying to search in.
But in this website, if you go to Google, all those pictures are allowed to
Right. So what Creative Commons Search does is it puts in only show me images that are related to that I'm allowed to modify. So it's different from direct. Right, exactly. So I put in black and white photo into Flickr, and I can scroll through and see a variety of options. These are all really nice black and white photos. So I might come back and say black and white photo old, for example. And I want to pick something that's a little bit faded. So something like this one might not be bad. Click on it. Flickr's running very slow right now. And I have some that I've already used on my flash drive. Come on, Flickr. Well, we'll let that one attempt to show up. Probably because all of us are trying to go on Flickr right now, right? So I don't know why that one's not working. I'm going to go ahead and move on and pick one of the ones that I've already downloaded before. So in Photoshop, once I've downloaded and saved that file, I'm going to go to File and then Open to open up that image. So let me get into my folder for today. And I'll pick a hold on, I'm deciding which one I'll pick. I'll start with this one. I may end up doing a couple different ones so that we can contrast them. So let me open a few more. There you go. So I was just picking a few different ones so that depending on these effects, you may see a bigger or lesser change. So I'll go through a variety of them. You guys, in part 2, are going to pick an image, and you can choose to do different images each time, or you can choose to work with the same images for part 2, part 3, and part 4. It's up to you. Part 5 will be another set of images, and we'll get to that in a second. So I'm going to start with part 2 here, and I'm going to walk through it. First thing I'll do is I'm going to create an adjustment layer. So we did this last class with a levels adjustment. So I'll go in and I'll go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Levels. And I'll say, OK, that gives me the adjustment layer. You can already tell by the histogram here that it would help if I just pulled in that black point from where the image was. So there's the image where it was. If I pull in that black point, the image is already getting a little bit better. So that helps. When I'm done making that adjustment to the image, I'm going to go and change this levels adjustment to be a multiply. And we'll watch what happens. So when I do the multiply, you see that it does a fantastic job of bringing out the clouds. We can really see those where before we really couldn't see them. So it's a big difference there. When I do it, however, the dark areas of the photo become really dark. And so it might be a little bit too much in that sense. So you have to be careful about how much is the right amount. So I've done that with the this first one. And actually, for clarity purposes, I'm going to call this my multiply, so that you guys can see it. And I'll do it on all the images, so you'll see me repeat this process. So you don't have to keep up or keep along with me. You'll have plenty of time to work through this today. Let me do it again. This time, I'll do a levels adjustment. So Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Levels. Same thing, I'll drag that down. And this time, instead of doing it as a multiply, I'm going to do this one as a screen. And so let me switch the levels adjustment to screen. And you'll see that I can see a lot more detail down here in the trees and the bushes. That's distinctly different. I have a really clear sense of what's happening there. Now, I've completely lost the sky, and I've lost most of this mountain. So it's great for lightening the dark areas of the photos, but it blew out the rest of the photo a fair amount. So that was my screen mode. So let's turn that one off again. And I'll do one more adjustment layer. And I'll go into Levels. Same thing, I'll pull this over like that. And this time, instead of multiply or screen, this is going to be the overlay. So now I have the overlay mode here. And I'm going to switch this to be in overlay. And you'll see that it's doing kind of both at once. So it's darkening the darks and lightening the lights. And again, this one might not be the best outcome either. I'm not expecting any one of these to be better or worse than the others. I just want you to have the experience of turning them on. So in this case, as I was looking at it, I think the multiply is probably the best. But the multiply, which brought the clouds back, did a little bit too much for this down here. So I might just adjust the opacity value down a bit, which is going to give me kind of the best of both worlds. I still get the clouds, but this isn't quite as shadowed. Let me go ahead and move to another image.
Keep like before you do the, can you keep the sky but just lighting up?
We're getting to that. So you hang tight. We're going to get there. I can only give you guys so much at a time, okay? Yes, ultimately that's where we're going, to be able to selectively control this part applies to just this part of the image, this part applies to just that part of the image. And we will get there, I promise. But we have to build to it a little bit. So let me go back through with a different image this time and just show you how it changes on a different image. So same thing, same strategy. I'll go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and I'll go to Levels. The histogram on this one's a little bit different. I can bring out the darks, and I can pinch over the lights a bit. So there I am. Now on this, we'll switch to the multiply blending mode first and see, do we like it? Not sure. Might be a little strong. Let me go ahead and do it again on another levels adjustment. So let me once again go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Levels. We'll pull that over, pull this over, and we'll move to the screen blending mode. There it is. You can see it. We've lost a lot of the detail in the dress on that mode. And then we'll go to the last one. Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and we'll go to our levels. Pull that one over, pull this one over, and this time we're going to do an overlay mode. And in this one, I think maybe that one actually is the best result. It's probably still a little bit too strong, so we can change that back down just a bit, maybe about like that. So again, it's to my eye. It's depending on what looks right to you as you go through this, and you'll see, and that's part of the experimentation process. One more here, just to reiterate the process. Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Levels. Like that. Then we're going to apply the different blending modes. I'm going to shortcut myself since I've done this before. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the layer 3 times, because the adjustment has applied to all of them. There. Sorry, on the duplicate. There. And on each of these, we're going to have different adjustments. So this first one would be a multiply, making the image significantly too dark in this context. Next one would be a screen. Yeah, that's actually pretty good. It brought a lot of the detail back. Yeah.
So when you stretch the level, right, you move the black and the white, isn't the same effect as overlay?
It's a little bit different in terms of how it processes. And you can see that by, so here's the one where I've just moved it versus the old image. Okay, so that does help. But when I apply to this the overlay, it changes the image further. So if they were the same, we'd get the same result. And since it's not, we're getting a little bit different result. So what I want you to do is I want you to play around with these as you go through to kind of learn and get comfortable with the blending modes. That's the important thing. When you're done, you're going to save an original. So this is your file saved for web. You'll save your original, and then you'll save it with the multiply, with the overlay, and with the screen mode. So all 3 of the different modes. If you do a different photo for each part 2, part 3, and part 4, you'll have one original and one different one. If you do the same photo for part 2, part 3, and part 4, which is also okay, you'll have one original and then 3 different ones. Does that make sense? So you could end up with more images than I'm saying in terms of posting. Now let's get into part 5. This is where we're going to work with luminosity on a particular photo. And this works great if you have a photo with a lot of reds and or blues in it. So think sunsets or high saturation photos. So I'll go in and go to File and then Open. And I'll open up one of these sunsets here. These are HDR images, so they're already nice. But let's enhance this a little bit further. So what I'm going to do is, instead of going and adjusting the levels on this, I'm going to go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and I'm going to choose Curves instead. We did curves last class a little bit.
What do you mean HDR, remind me?
High dynamic range image. We'll cover that again. It's the composite of 3 images, 3 different exposures. But don't worry, we'll get into that again. So this is the curves adjustment, a little bit different than the levels adjustment. And what we want here is we want our typical S curve. So I'll set a point in the center. I'll pull up here, and I'll pull down here just a little bit. So it has a vague shape of an S, a very tapered S. Once I have that S curve, which is then applying to the image, by itself, you can tell that it's already bringing out the colors a bit more in the image. We can take this curves adjustment and instead apply something called a luminosity. It's the last one here at the very bottom. And when the luminosity applies, it makes it so that we don't have the little blowouts in our color as much. And this is really hard for you guys to see on the projector, but when you do it in person, you should be able to see it happen. Here was my original. The clouds have a little bit of, let me do just a curves without the luminosity on it. See if I can illustrate this for you guys a little bit better. Okay, so I have, there's my original image, and maybe trying to see what the best way of showing you guys this is. So there's my original where I'm seeing the sun. Now when I apply the first curves adjustment, you can tell that it's pulling out a lot of the yellows and the reds, and it's almost a little bit oversaturated in its colors, especially right in here and right up here. If instead, so there it is, same layer, if I change this to be the luminosity when we come down here, you'll see that it doesn't have quite the same blowout effect. I don't know, can you even see that on the projector? No, you probably can't. So you're going to have to do it on your screen. I can see it on the screen. There's a subtle difference. Essentially, it's not quite as saturated. It gives you a little bit more definition. So it's a fine-tuned adjustment. It works great with reds and blues. That's what we're shooting for here. So I could also open, as an example, see if I can find another one. There's another sunset example. It's amazing. You can't see any of the bottom half of that particular photo. Let me go in and do the curves adjustment on this. So layer, new adjustment layer, curves. I'll set the middle. We'll pull this up. We'll pull this down just a bit, like that. And we'll take this curves adjustment and apply the luminosity to it. You probably can't see the difference on the screen. When you guys do it, you'll see it. Okay? So that's the luminosity. That's part 5. So you'll have an original image and one with the luminosity blending mode applied to it. So the last piece, if you flip the page over, is part 6. And for part 6, we're going to do something where we apply a texture behind or over the top of a particular image. You can pick any image you want for this, so you could change to a different image you want. I'm going to use this same photo here of the sunset. And so when I set this one up, what I need first is what's called a grunge texture. And those of you that were in 136, the 2 of you, you remember I was kind of obsessed with grunge textures and applying grunge textures, right? Same thing applies here. We're going to apply it. And what a grunge texture is it's essentially something that's dirty. And one of the things that happens in computer-generated graphics and art and that sort of thing is that everything is very clean and precise. And you can get a lot of mileage out of a little bit of dirt if you apply that little bit of dirt in a nice, consistent way. So we're going to show you how to go through and apply that little bit of dirt or a little bit of grain to an image. First off, I need, there's the black and white image I was trying to get from Flickr. I need a grunge texture. So search.creativecommons.org. I need a grunge texture. And you could maybe paper. I might add that. I'm going to do a Google image search this time because Flickr was so slow. And essentially what these grunge textures are images could it load any slower? Are images like this, where there's a little bit of texture. Like this is a crinkled piece of paper with a few spots of ink and miscellaneous on it. As I look through here, there's some other ones that look pretty good. That paper one looks pretty good. And over time, you'll find that you start to collect grunge textures for use later on. I have a few of my favorites that I like to use. This one actually looks really nice. And I'm just going through and I'm picking a variety of these. I'm going to do this one just because it has a little bit of graphics on it, just so that you can see how that applies too. OK, so I might take one of these, and I'll download that. I want the highest resolution possible. Perfect. Download. No, that one's nice too. This one, right-click, save image as. It depends on where you get them. On my flash drive, in my OneDrive folder, I have a resources folder. Inside of that, I have a folder for grunge textures. This is where I store them all. And so I'll go ahead and save that in there. There was that other one. Save image as. We'll put it in the same spot. Save. All right, let me download this one. Please log in for downloading full resolution images. All right, well, how about we don't do this full resolution? Nope, I'm not a robot. Come on. Anyway, you guys don't have to sit there and watch me download these. I have a few of them that I've downloaded. And what I'm going to do is here in my photo, I'm going to go ahead and bring that image on top of this image. So I'll go to File and then Place. And when I go to File and then Place, I can go to my OneDrive folder. I can go into my resources. I can go into my grunge textures. And I can pick one of those textures that I just downloaded. So we'll start with this one. And I'll say Place. And there it is. Control minus will zoom me out just a little bit. And I need to make this big enough to cover the page. So let me hold down Shift as I transform. When I hold down Shift, it keeps my file in proportions, so I'm not skewing the image. The alternative, no, it's not going to let me do it. I'll do it on the next one. You can stretch the image, would be the option. Now, when I'm doing a grunge texture, stretching the image doesn't matter. You could stretch it and it would be fine. If you're manipulating a regular image, you probably don't want to stretch it. So I'll go ahead and commit to this particular size. I commit to it with this little check mark in my contextual ribbon that's up here. I say, yes, I like it. And now it's a matter of taking this particular texture and applying one of our chosen layer blending modes. So we'll start first with multiply on it and see what happens. So in that case, it's pretty strong, but I'm seeing the grunge shining through on this. Maybe we'll switch and we'll go to screen mode. I don't like that. Let's try our overlay mode and see if that works. OK, that one's kind of interesting. This might be too strong, in which case I can adjust the opacity value down. So I get just a little bit of the grunge, but not too much of it. Let me turn that one off. I'll bring in a different one. Sometimes it takes a few tries to figure out what's the best looking one. Here's a wrinkled paper one. There it is. It comes in. Now, what I was talking about skewing the image is if I just went without holding down Shift, see how I can stretch the image in different directions? It's not in proportions. If I hold down Shift, it'll lock into being in proportion. So maybe about like that. I'll commit to the change. There we go. And I'll go in and adjust this. We'll try first with multiply. A little bit too dark. But if I went in and adjust the opacity down, we might be able to find the right happy medium. If we switch to screen mode, it's a little bit too light. And let's try our overlay mode. Yeah, that one looks pretty good. So we're adding just a little bit of wrinkle behind this particular image. There are other ones that have just dirt in them. Sometimes you can achieve a vignetting effect. Let me go ahead and place another image. Let's see if I can find one of these. How are there none showing up in here? Oh, it's still downloading some of them. I don't have them all. Yeah, I don't have them yet. Anyway, play around with it and try a few different options. And for this last piece, you're going to do, again, your original image and your one with a grunge texture applied to it. Okay? So once you've completed all that, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 images or so that I'm looking for today. I'm not, if you use the same image for multiple steps, you'll have a few less images. I'm not going to go through and say, oh, you know, Ryan, you didn't have all 10 images, you don't get credit, right? If you have 7 images, I'm still okay with that. Okay, so we're just looking for you guys to learn this process. Today is very much about skill building. It's about understanding that blending modes exist. If you have time and you've finished it, go ahead and try on something like this. Try some of the other ones. See what happens. These ones in here that I was saying have very strange results. Try those and see what happens. So there was difference. There's exclusion. What's happening there? So there's no harm in running through a couple different options here to see which one feels right. So go ahead and play around with those other options. The other thing is, so we did overlay, for example, and it looked pretty good. Maybe one of these other ones is good. They're less commonly used, but you may find that a soft light effect might be a good effect. Maybe a hard light effect is a good effect. So you can play around with those other options too. Just because I say use the overlay, the screen, and the multiply doesn't mean you have to be stuck in just those. Okay? So remember that you do have your first assignment due on Wednesday, which is your best image. Some post-processing needs to be applied to it in all likelihood. You don't have to do blending modes just because I talked about blending modes today, so don't feel like that's a necessary post-processing step. Remember, when you work on your assignment, it's about what you think is the best thing to do for your image. Okay? So just because I give you all these different tools doesn't mean you use all the different tools. So be selective and decide which ones look best on your image. You're going to turn that in, your original plus your post-processed image, plus the paragraph. Don't forget, I'm sorry I'm beating you over the head with this, but I want to make sure you don't forget the paragraph. I want you guys to get credit for that. Little paragraph that describes what you did, what your adjustments were, and the printed one out of the color laser printer. Just the paper record. 8.5 by 11, nothing fancy. I'll collect it up here. Remember, it's due before I start talking next class. So it has to be posted on the website. If you hand me the paper version later on in class, that's fine. I'm not going to be critical about the paper version. But the post has to have happened before I start talking next class. So remember, that's right at about 8:10. It might be 8:12, but that's what we're looking at. So make sure it's turned in on time. I don't want any of you guys to have that late penalty. Okay? If you finish early today, which is likely for a lot of you, go ahead and work on that image and get it post-processed and feel good about that image and be ready for next class. If you finish that, work on one of your other studios. If you're in 121, work on 121. I'm sure you have stuff to do. Okay? I know all of you in 120 are like, oh no, right? It is what it is. Okay, any questions about this? Nope. All right, I'll turn you loose.